um, English 101 Shoreline Community College online session. I want to make a quick video about personal narrative drafts. I'm about halfway through grading the personal narratives, and probably by the time you're watching this, hopefully, I should have been done grading all of them. So I kind of wanted to take a step back and address why we began this quarter with personal narratives, and I think maybe I've addressed it a little bit before, but I want to sort of revisit that. So one thing about personal narratives is that they have all of the component parts of an essay. That is, they have an introduction, they have a body, and they have a conclusion. However, you're kind of saved from having to worry about super formal wording or how to organize things or research, right? So we kind of streamline things a little bit and are able to dip our toe in the water without too much craziness. And so what I wanted to talk about first is kind of a reminder that drafting is a process and writing is really recursive. We're constantly sort of cycling back and learning things. So there's, I guess, two ways in which writing is recursive. One in which an individual piece of writing is recursive. We write and then we go back and revise and then we go back and edit and so on and so forth. But learning writing is also recursive. We learn how to write an essay and then later we learn how to write an essay all over again, and we're always kind of constantly developing and becoming more sophisticated. As I mentioned a moment ago, most of the time when we're writing a personal narrative, we write it in chronological order. That is, the order in which the events transpired. The chase, me talk pretty one day, and 4th of July all happen in chronological order. That is, the narrators tell them in the order that the events happened. Now, what I'd like you to do is, if we were in a in-person class, I would give you 5 minutes or so to do this exercise. So what I would like you to do is, either now or later, take 5 minutes to map out your personal narrative. What is the exposition? That is, what are all of the things that lead into your story, the background, right? The exposition is where your life was before you hit that inciting event. And that inciting event was the thing that catapulted you off in a new direction. The rising action is the building tension. Hopefully you listened to Aaron Baker's piece, Good News versus Bad News. Now, if you did that, you know that the tension rises as she's telling other people her mother is pregnant, and as her father is uncomfortable, and as her father takes her to Cold Stone Creamery. And then the climactic moment is, of course, when her dad says, "The baby is not mine," right? The falling action then is her sort of beginning to come to terms with the new situation. Her parents get divorced, her mom moves in down the street, her baby sister is born. What I would like you to do is, in about 5 minutes or more or less, either simply answer these questions or draw out that Freytag's triangle and go ahead and plot things out, just so you can see what you think the climactic moment is, what the reflection is, and so on and so forth. So I'll give you a moment. If you want to pause me, go ahead. And now we'll move on. So what I would like you to do is start to think about the reflection, because the reflection is really the closing paragraph or the conclusion to your personal narrative. And I know that most of us do not like writing concluding paragraphs for essays. What are the reasons for that? It seems repetitive. We feel like we've already said everything. It seems like it's just a rehashing of the introduction. Well, I think when it comes to a personal narrative, the conclusion is very apparent if it is a reflection and that we are stating our closing case. So I want you to do what basically the same thing I just had you do, and you can pause this video, you can do this exercise later, and take a moment and think about the event or events that you're writing about. Why does this event stand out to you? Again, why are you writing about this particular event? How did it change or influence the way that you act? Right? This is the sort of like why? Why this event? And really internalizing why it's important to you. After you do that, what I would like you to do is write out, answer one of these questions or continue one of these two things. What I didn't know at the time was whatever that was. Or before this happened, I had always believed. Again, the reason for this is that a personal narrative is a sort of point in time where you changed as a person, big, small, or indifferent. Well, not indifferent, right? It would have to be a difference. So finishing one of these sentences might help you begin to understand, again, maybe what you learned from that experience. Now, do you have to use this information in your reflection? Of course not. But this is part of the writing process that goes on behind the scenes, right? It's sort of internalizing things. Okay, so I want to turn briefly to How to Tell a True War Story by Tim O'Brien. And I wanted to end with this story for very specific reasons, for a few very specific reasons. One of which is that O'Brien is playing with something that is necessary to address in a personal narrative, and that is this sort of question of truth. Now, by truth, do I mean the big metaphysical, philosophical, what is truth with a capital T? No, and I don't really think that that's necessarily what O'Brien is getting at either. I think what he's talking about when he's talking about truth or a true story is something actually quite unique to a personal narrative. So think for a moment about how you would define truth. Most of us, I think, will probably answer, well, it's what actually happened. It's the reality of what happened. But that would give us kind of more of just a news story type thing. First X happened, then Y happened, then Z happened. And it sort of removes the emotional content from it. So if we look at this story, multiple times throughout How to Tell a True War Story, he says, this is true. I am telling you the truth. But when he does that, he also tells the story of Kurt Lemon dying at least 3 different times. And the final time, he begins as so. This one does it for me. I've told it before, many times, many versions, but here's what actually happened. Now, as a reader, we should stop and say, wait a minute. So the other versions are not what actually happened, and now this is what's actually happened. Why is that? And if we think about it, and you think about your memoir or your personal narrative, I'll kind of use them as two things interchangeably. What do we remember? And this is kind of the territory of personal narrative, is the way that I remember things may not be the way that things happened, right? Some various reasons for that. Perhaps I didn't remember a detail. I don't remember exactly how somebody said something, but I could piece it together. Perhaps the more that I think about it, the more my recollection changes. And perhaps you've encountered this when telling a story or recounting a story with friends or family, that they remember things slightly differently. So I think when O'Brien is talking about truth, he's not necessarily talking about truth solely as what happened first, second, third, etc., but maybe a little bit more of emotional truth. That is to say, he has to change some things. In here as well, there is the story that his friend Mitchell Sanders, tells him about this squad that went up into the mountains, and they heard a glee club, and they heard an orchestra, and they heard a dinner party. And shortly after, the next day, Sanders says, I got a confession to make. Last night, man, I had to make up a few things. I know that. The glee club? There wasn't any glee club. Right. No opera. Forget it. I understand. So Mitchell Sanders had done the same thing. He had made up some things in order to get at the emotional truth. Now, there's another example of this in here that I want to point to really quickly, and that is this situation in which Rat Kylie starts shooting at the water buffalo. And it's a really sort of sadistic, he shoots the water buffalo in the knee and then the other knee, and then he shoots its nose off, and it's really gory and disgusting. And as readers, it's hard not to be horrified by this. It's really terrible because the buffalo is innocent and has done nothing to him. This, I think, gets at a greater emotional truth. That is what it must have felt like and how horrific it must have been to be in this situation. So, how does all of this apply to your personal narrative? Think about the emotional truth. And if you need to change things or alter things, minor things, of course, that is something that happens. Now, changing major things, completely making things up, is dangerous, dangerous territory. Some of you may know or may have heard about the story A Million Little Pieces or A Million Tiny Pieces that came out about 15 years ago now, in which a gentleman made up a story about his life as a drug addict and being a recovering drug addict, and later it was learned that he had completely fabricated a great deal of this. Now, that is a type of fraud. And while we might make up minor things about a specific event, minor details, what somebody was wearing or where exactly we were, what time of day it was, fabricating things entirely is a lie. It's saying, hey, here's my real truth. But it's really just fiction. So it is that fine line between fiction and nonfiction. So as you progress with this personal narrative, the last little thing that I want to leave you with is remember that you are telling a story here. So you want to get into all of those fun things like physical description and dialogue and describing not only people but setting. I hope that helps clarify a little bit. If you're stuck on these personal narratives, I suggest you look at my notes on your intro paragraph, and I also suggest that you maybe go back to whichever of those mentor texts resonated most with you. Now, next week we'll be turning our attention towards The Handmaid's Tale. The first reading for next week will be on understanding what a synthesis essay is, and if you don't know what that is totally fine. We will be learning about that. It's a type of looking at an essay and looking at a piece of writing and analyzing it closely. So we'll be working on our close reading skills and our critical thinking skills next week, and then we'll be spending a couple weeks, I think 2 weeks, working on The Handmaid's Tale. If you want to get ahead in the reading, of course, that is totally acceptable and totally up to you. This is an online class, so it's go at your own pace. The physical book is great. The audio book, there are a couple really great audio editions. I will say that the TV show is great. It's well done and gritty as the book is, but they do change some things. So please don't rely on simply watching the Hulu TV show and thinking, that's all I need. Additionally, if you are listening to the audiobook or watching the TV show, do also procure a copy of the physical book, because you are going to be writing a couple pieces in response to or about the book. So it'll be nice for you to be able to flip through and find quotes and whatnot. My last little thing on that is, please avoid the temptation to go online and go to SparkNotes or GradeSaver or whatever website that explains what The Handmaid's Tale is about and the themes in it. And then that is not because as a teacher I hate those websites. I actually like them. They're good. But I want you to analyze the book on your own. I want you to come up with your own interpretation and reaction to the book without it being influenced by somebody else. Now, later on, once you've read it and thought about it and talked about it and maybe written about it, then it might be okay to go ahead and read what GradeSaver has to say, right? All right, I think that's it. Light speed version today for me. I know it's still almost 16 minutes. So with that said, email me with questions. Let me know where you're at with this, and I'll try and help you as best as I can. That's what I'm here for, and I will talk to you in the near future.